Okay, so we're on. Welcome, Nigel and Pauline. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes,
Hey,
very
Tom,
glad.
thanks for having me.
Afternoon there in Australia. This is, of course, the Australia panel, and the idea is to talk a bit about the ecosystem, digital ecosystem in Australia, and what opportunities there might be in Australia for Central East European companies. And I think there have been some experiences of Aussie companies, startups, scale-ups, enterprises using talent from Central East Europe, and that is kind of the overriding conversation for today. Let me first introduce Nigel Standish. Nigel is a colleague of mine for about 20 plus years, and he has been running businesses in Poland and Hungary and Czech Republic, as well as in Australia from multiple different sectors, media business, software business, et cetera, et cetera. And Pauline is a new acquaintance of mine, River City Labs in Brisbane, correct?
Correct.
And I will let you introduce yourself a bit more. In fact, as well, Nigel, yourself. But Pauline does have a short presentation, so I'll pass the floor to Pauline. And thank you guys once again. I'm going to stay on the call, but over to Pauline and your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So while the presentation I'm hoping is coming up in a couple of seconds for you guys, I thought a bit of background on myself. So I run a tech incubator in Queensland, Australia, and Brisbane is the main city over here. And the tech incubator is focused on accelerating early stage startups to scaling companies for their growth to accelerate overseas into new markets, as well as obviously grow within Australia and across this region. The tech incubator itself has about 51 startups in there at the moment. We're pretty active and thriving in COVID. Luckily, we've had quite a few incentives to keep us continuing and growing for the startup community through some government initiatives. However, abroad across the ICT sector and technology resources, it's been quite a challenge as a lot of the roles in the economy in itself has been quite challenged. But we're pretty lucky, so we can't complain at all for 2020. Prior to River City Labs, I've currently about 1 year and a little bit old in River City Labs. Prior to that, I was in corporate for 19 years. So particularly, I have a business background in digital transformation, as well as regulatory recovery for enterprise systems and a technology background as well. So I'm a little bit lucky on both sides. I know enough of tech to be dangerous, but don't know too much to get into it too much and take over, which I'm pretty blessed to have. I've been both on the client side as well as the service provider side. And the last 5 years I spent, 6.5 years spent with Hewlett-Packard in their business process outsourcing space as a pre-sales consultant. And then I was an independent consultant doing a lot of work with IT recovery and working with a lot of the tier 1 companies here. So the presentation I'm going to take you through today, thank you, Tom, for giving me some ideas on what you think is relevant for the audience. And I thought it'd be a little bit about an exploratory around what's going on in Australia to start with. And so firstly, just a background, River City Labs is owned by the Australia Computer Society, which is the ICT Association for Australia. And that is who I work for. And recently we released a digital pulse report. And in that report, what we had was the insight into what is happening in the ICT sector in Australia and what is coming. And so I thought it'd be really good to give you some key insights into that. I'll just check that. Can you actually see my screen? That's working okay?
1 second.
Thumbs up?
Yeah, it's coming up. We got it. Good.
Great. Fabulous.
Nice.
Technology,
So what you will see is a few of the key insights, and I'm hoping it moves. Just hoping. Lovely. There we go. So the Digital Pulse was actually authored by Deloitte's Economics in Australia and sponsored by Australia Computer Society. And again, it was an insight into what is going on in the ICT sector, especially given COVID-19. And the reason why I think this is relevant for you to understand the landscape here is because you could see where some of the investments may be going or some of the focus areas may be going if you are to engage in this region. So kicking off, 2019 pre-COVID, ICT actually in regards to roles, and I'm going to measure it through IT skills, and you'll get to understand why. They were actually
Pauline, let me interrupt you 1 second before you get going, because I think some people will ask about the presentations or the videos later. And just so everyone knows, again, a little housekeeping, all of the videos will be available later on on our channel. We'll make sure you all see it. So they'll be done by categories or by panel. So we'll have the Aussie panel video will be available for review later on, just so you guys know that. Back to you.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Perfect. Yeah. So you don't need to take photos of the screens, which is
That's
what
right.
I often do.
Right.
So the workforce actually grew in the ICT space by 6.7% in 2019, which was really exciting, and 13.7% in technical and professional skills. What to me that tells you is that, there's obviously a growing appetite to invest more into the IT and digital space, which is a good thing. And there was also, I haven't put the outsourcing and offshoring numbers in here, but there was quite a healthy appetite to offshore and partner with service providers overseas. Since COVID-19, the new forecast for growth is going to be 3.1% on average for the next 5 years, which is a little bit disappointing, but understandable given the climate. It has been negatively impacted, of course, in the demand for resources in technology as an outcome of COVID-19. And there is still an increased demand, as we all know globally, on the digital economy, and for us to actually improve in that space, specifically in Australia. The key thing, I think, which is really important, obviously we're a bit of an island. We're a bit far from everyone, especially in Europe. And we definitely have had reported for multiple years now, forecasted a gap in the growth of resources, IT roles that we need to meet our demand and actually to be a leader in the digital economy. Right now, forecast is about 388,000 more resources are required in IT to be actually be able to meet or actually get ahead in the digital economy, because currently we are not. And that's a bit of a challenge, and that's been an ongoing challenge for some time, and now further compounded because of COVID-19. So the report overall provided 6 recommendations, and it really focused on initiatives that were around the funding and policy changes domestically. So there really wasn't much, as you can imagine, focus on overseas engagement or resourcing or further partnering offshore, as you can imagine. And however, there has been a global talent scheme that has been implemented by the Australian government, and that is specifically to attract overseas talent, and that is focused both on entrepreneurship, but also in the ICT skills sector. And I've listed there for you the specific areas of focus, and those are the 7 target industries and sectors that are being a focus for ICT skills to bring them over. So just to rattle them off: ag tech, space and advanced manufacturing, fintech, energy and mining, medtech, cybersecurity, as you can imagine, and quantum information, advanced digital, and obviously big data and AI is very important. So the report link is there. You guys can, sorry, Tom?
I'll jump in once again, because I was speaking yesterday to one of the guys on the jury and speaking in the German panel. He is from the ag tech space, BayWa, German company, and they were telling us about what they're doing in satellite imagery on the ag tech. So hot space, unusually, I didn't really know how big it was, but it's apparently pretty big. Again, you might have a chance to meet with those guys.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. And if you don't get a hold of me tonight, I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn as well. So for me specifically at River City Labs, we have a large focus on ag tech because we're in Queensland, and Queensland's, if you look at the map, you'll see why. There's not much going on in the middle of Queensland. There's a lot of rural areas and regional areas, and a lot of opportunity for agriculture to be disrupted with tech. So there's a lot going on in that space. So would love to connect. Yes, thanks. So I'll move on from there and just give you an idea of the typical engagement models, and I'm sure, Nigel, you can add to this, but I thought this might be worthwhile because it'll give you some insights on how you can actually reach these particular clients. So government in particular and their IT engagement models, typically they have in-house, and I've worked in all these sectors, which is why I can give some level of insight into this, but they generally have in-house technology teams because that's their predominant to have a secure base in-house control. They have a panel of technology suppliers, and it's typically quite difficult and a challenge to get on that panel. You have to work incredibly hard through a tender process, be very experienced. Often you'll find is a lot of the global IT partners are on those panels, or very well experienced, renowned national partners locally here. And of course, they also have boutique specialist partners on those panels as well. The tier 1 corporates and tier 2 corporates, you know, they engage with local suppliers, preferred panel of technology that they have as well. However, they also can be quite dynamic, and they bring on new panel members as often as a new technology or a new opportunity or some funding arrives in the portfolio to invest in a particular area of their business or products come. That's when they actually go and seek the market to look for providers in specialist spaces to deliver on their tech projects. And then, of course, we have the small and medium businesses. And what I found is that definitely there is more leniency towards, of course, the local providers, boutique providers, freelancers. They also may have an internal team, especially the more medium-sized businesses. They may offshore, but it is by referral or compare sites similar to Clutch.co, and some of the medium businesses may go through a tender process, but pretty much unlikely they will go by referral.
I'll jump in again, Pauline. It's like you've got points that are kind of interesting. I didn't ask you to put Clutch on there either, but they are actually speaking in the afternoon. You guys will be asleep by then, but we have Washington, D.C.-based Clutch, Ora, who is their strategic partnership director. She's speaking as the last panel on the U.S. today. And we have also done a deal, our association, to start carrying all of Clutch's digital service provider directory on our website, which is there right now, just from a few weeks ago. But interesting, we have her in the afternoon today. So
yeah, that's excellent. I'll have to actually watch that later. I actually found my own team. I have an offshore team in India from Clutch.co, and I'll talk a little bit about that process later if you like. The technology startups in particular, I have a tech startup myself, as well as running River City Labs. And my tech startup, as I mentioned, I engaged I down selected to an Indian offshore mobile development company, and that was going through Clutch.co. But I also engaged with a company in Estonia through the process. So I had one Estonian company, 2 Indian companies, and down selected to the Indian eventually. And I'll give you a bit of insight on a couple of slides in a moment on that. But typically technology startups in Australia or in Queensland that I've witnessed, they start off obviously with in-house teams. They've got either a tech founder or a tech co-founder, or they engage with freelancers if they're a business founder doing a technology startup. They are obviously a little bit more fluid in their approach to seeking out experience by referral, proven specialist humans that will actually match their culture of their tech startup. So they're a bit more open to offshoring in the relevant parts for them that is cost effective, that can get them off the ground. But again, when they start to scale, then they start headhunting for experienced resources in other startups that they may be able to pinch once they start scaling. So there's a few different engagement models there that you can see. Nigel, from your perspective, do you think I've missed any? I think you're on mute.
In the background, sorry. No, I think you've covered it well there. And in particular, that sweet spot of small to medium businesses moving into tech startups. I think that's an area that people participating today could definitely access, because that government panel is a tough one, but further down is definitely opportunity land.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. And I think even more so, if you guys have a chance to, if you want to know how to find who's got funding to actually invest in technology resources offshore, keep monitoring the local startup channels on LinkedIn, on Facebook. They are part of those groups, and they talk about their resource demands in there. On each city has their own startup group, and they're constantly posting their resource needs. Not that you should sell or proliferate that area, but it gives you an insight into who's actually raising. Then you can actually start to get to know these companies more intimately, especially those scaling companies. The other part is, of course, of any of those companies who have just received funding, whether it's a grant or it's a commercialization grant or it's a investor capital that they've raised. It's good insight to find those ones. So from here, I'll give you a bit of a background, and you may have seen this or heard about this before, so definitely not old news. But, you know, Australia's offshoring experience was born out of the actual BPO engagement, and the Australian banking sector was the ones who led that. And they kicked that off, and obviously then it started to go into the IT sector. Currently with COVID-19, some of the issues that we're seeing is that there's definitely a I think I've actually just skipped a slide. Don't mind me. Sorry. There we go. That's a little bit better. Sorry, guys. I think we've missed a slide. I'm going to make do. So just ignore that slide for a second. I'll just tell you a bit because I know it off by heart anyway. I will update, and I can share the pack offline, Tom, if that's better, so you can distribute that. And I'll correct that. But we actually have, the experience has been born out of the BPO sector. It went into the IT sector. And then from there, it started on the back of having a cost-effective scalability model. So obviously people wanted to offshore so that they could get the benefit of scaling at a lower price. It then moved quickly into the skills gap space for IT. In particular, the senior ICT roles that were very scarce to get, and the developer skills that were scarce to get in Australia started to become a demand to actually go and seek that offshore, because we are quite isolated, and because from the previous slide, we do have a challenge in regards to our skills. So skills shortage, should I say. So there definitely is multiple factors that, you know, Australia has, is fluent in offshoring, but they predominantly go to the Asia region, or they predominantly go to anywhere that is closer within the time zone of Australia. And they definitely are a little bit more parochial, and they actually prefer to engage directly with people who have actually worked in this market or worked and delivered services into this market before and can understand the ways of working, which I'm going to talk about now. So I think there's a couple of challenges, and that's what the key concerns that there may be currently, especially post-COVID, because of the disruption of services that have occurred for some of the existing services that have been provided by offshore delivery teams. There has been a noticeable reduction in the engagement, and models starting to shift to come into actually bringing things back onshore. And I think that is the threat and the risk that you would have to navigate in engaging in Australia, because there is already a very special nuance in dealing with companies in Australia, and that's been my experience with. They're very particular, and they prefer that it's something that's been tried and tested, and they've actually worked here before, or someone's referred me to it, so I can, and they're a trusted referral. And it works a little bit like that, definitely, in the experience that I've had. So I have listed some of the recommendations on what to consider when you are actually looking to engage. Oh, that was the slide that I was actually meant to walk you guys through, so apologies for that. Let me check if I've missed anything. No, I don't think I have. Yeah, so the location selections, yeah, the cost, scalability, time zone, prior experience with Australia. So back to where I was, and this is the title, what to consider when engaging Australian clients for this content. COVID-19 and those services being disrupted, sovereignty has become a key focus. So you may, if you're reading the Australian news, or you're looking online to see what the government is issuing out and the language that they're using at the moment, there is a big focus of sovereignty and being self-sustainable, especially as an isolated country in a very different time zone to a lot of the world. And what that has brought about is a lot of fear factor that has been set into companies, both in the public and private sector, definitely in the small and medium businesses, for sure. Not so much in the tech startup world, because they don't really listen to any of the mainstream news. They're too focused on executing, but definitely it's a strong focus. So any way that you can demonstrate some level of how you would mitigate the risk of their services being disrupted or being unreliable, that is a key thing that would have to be considered when you're actually engaging a client from here on. Cybersecurity, data privacy, and that is a global emerging concern. Cybersecurity, obviously, and data privacy has always been a priority for IT. However, with the recent 2020 experience and a lot of the large global IT companies and the global social media behemoths and their data privacy issues that they've been, streaming on the social media has also created some fear over here. And then that will influence and put some more bias into the decision making when it comes to selecting an offshore IT partner. So those are some of the things that you'd have to demonstrate. And then it goes down to obviously industry-specific regulatory requirements. So how you're controlling the typical IT requirements obviously is more stringent for infrastructure support or networks and that sort of clouds or application services support businesses. But for digital, it's a little bit different. But when you're actually partnering with those clients, depending on their industry, so if they're in financial services, they have quite large reform that's going on at the moment. And that reform is across multiple sectors, not just financial services. It's impacting age, disability, and other sectors as well. And that means that they're going to spend more money focusing on delivering on regulatory reform than they are going to be focused on innovation or actually doing anything in the digital space. So one thing to consider is that if you're starting to look for a company or engaging with them, of course you see if they do fall into those sectors, what kind of reform is coming up for them, because it's all well publicized on the regulatory websites like ASIC and APRA. And it's following the UK in regards to some of the policies that they're introducing. The other thing is the time zones, and although we're in a digital connected world and we're so much more well connected after 2020, time zone still plays a factor into it. Typically, the Australian market and the clients, I definitely know from my experience being on the client side and having offshore teams, is there was an expectation that the teams would operate at the same hours that my team, my local IT team, were operating in. And that's a bit of a challenge, obviously, in your geography, because the time zone is quite different. So working around how that's going to look, I think those are some of the questions that may come up if you are engaging a company over here. Some companies will have no problems and they'll be able to work around that, and then some will. So that's something to consider. And then the ways of working. So I think culturally, the India and the Philippines have had a lot more experience in the Australian market, and the global IT companies with India and Philippine teams have led the way in what the expectation is on the services that come from offshore companies. And that expectation is that sort of gold platinum service of account management, if you know what I mean. So there is a lot of expectation when you engage some of these companies. If they've had that experience before and they've offshored before, their focus on client service and being on time, being specific, being accurate, sometimes especially in the early days or when you're actually trying to close a deal with an Australian client, you're really going to have to be considerate on what you lead in with. I know from the tender process that I went through, although it might seem quite fickle, I actually did not go with someone because they didn't even follow up after the call and send me stuff. I had to follow them up. And that's just stuff that, I don't have time for. And a lot of the Australian clients, especially the medium to larger size clients, that they won't have time for, and they'll just lose faith. And that's some of that trust. So building trust is by delivering on what you say, and that commitment, and also how you're personable. So actually, how do you communicate, and building a bit of a rapport. Australia has a way of working, and they call it like the Australian way, not to sound crazy, but it's true in every country, where you have a particular way in operating and how people deal with each other. And definitely when you engage with a partner, eventually you start to get some familiarity, and there's a little bit more of a relationship form that's easy. So it'll be good to lead in with that when you're also trying to secure a client. Dependability, transparency, that's pretty obvious. There's a lot of fear, which is why the transparency comes in. And then understanding their specific market is really important. A lot of people think that, oh, okay, well, banking over there is the same as banking over here. Insurance is the same as over here. It's not. Regulatory changes here, regulatory standards here, as well as the customer market here, is extremely different to a lot of the other countries. So get to understand that, because that will help you engage with your client better. So I hope some of that was helpful, and that's all I really had to show.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. It's a really good overview of the market. Pauline, other than the let's say the randomness factor when you meet someone and a reference comes in, are there any things that we could be doing to do a better job of getting engagement from Central European companies with Australia? I mean, is there any more structure? Because that's kind of what we're doing. And if there was a way to add a bit of a structure to that, as opposed to just a by chance we met someone, bumped into someone, I'd be curious to know if there's any ideas or thoughts you might have about that for future events we might end up doing with ourselves, with other people, other allies there in Australia, with your group, other groups like yours, other accelerators, incubators, because we think there's a lot of value that we can add from here. But having a bit more structure of how to engage with Australia would be wonderful.
I think I'll give you a few ideas that I think worked really well, and that's pre-COVID. We had the Estonia, one of the digital representatives from Estonia, who supported the building of their digital economy, who came over, and we ran a workshop, and we talked about what Estonia has done, and talked about the skills and the value of the skills that have been developed on the back of that. And I even had a government group come through and sit down and listen to that, to sort of thought leadership. So I think any way that you can sort of start to present your what you're actually doing in your region, and actually point it to some of the gaps that I've highlighted. So some of the needs of Australia, we need more IT roles. That's really obvious. We've got particular sectors that we're focusing on. We need to see what's going on in Eastern Europe. Like, I didn't know that there was an ag tech boom over there with one of the people that you just mentioned. We would like to know that. We should be sharing that. And each state has an innovation government department. So that focuses on innovation, technology startups, and they bring and they host a lot of countries to come over here previously, but now they can also do it online. There is a lot of appetite to do that. Victoria and New South Wales have just put aside a large amount of budget, larger than I believe the previous years, on their technology startup space. So there's definitely an interest. So the way we're run is state by state and reaching out to the state department. So as an example, one of our state departments is called, that runs our space in Queensland, is Advanced Queensland. So they run the innovation budget. So I work a lot with them. And then we bring over people from overseas. We had the LA's mayor office over here. We had Canada's chief digital officer who came over and talked about Canada and what they're doing. Those types of exposure to what you're doing starts to demystify that you've actually, unveil that you've actually got a lot of expertise in particular pockets. And then it actually normalizes and removes some of the fear that I talked about earlier. And then having access to how you actually engage and what your service models are and what does the price points look like and how would you mitigate the time zones and how flexible can you be. Those are some of the things that you guys can lead with to actually showcase the talent that you have over there that really we have no exposure to unless we go searching for it. We literally are an island sometimes, and I do get a lot of news obviously on a lot of things and quite connected, but yeah, we would love to hear more in that space. And I think maybe like you did, reaching out to incubators. Every state has incubators or innovation centers, and actually working across, even at the university sector level with the universities over here, there's an opportunity to do that. So I think you know, the digital engagement we have going on now is a big opportunity because if we can synchronize our time zones and we can make it accommodating on both sides and create a way to connect and expose what you're doing over there, then there'll be a lot more access to clients over here.
Okay, so let's consider this a first big step in the right direction, let's say. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Nigel, any thoughts about that? And one thing, Pauline, I wanted to ask you as well. You didn't talk about AI. AI also could be a space, but come back to that in a second. Nigel, thoughts from your side?
Yeah, no, I definitely, you know, agree with everything that Pauline said on that front. And I would say that, you know, that being professional and following up, and it's not just a matter of a, you know, email blast or, you know, getting a LinkedIn connection. Like Australian businesses would require a little bit more investment on the relationship, sales and marketing and account management side. But I think the good news is that the number of companies and that are willing to make that investment are not as many as you would expect. So if you do invest a little bit of time and effort, understand the market, understand who the players are, and then make a professional approach, that the opportunities are definitely there. Because as Pauline said, you know, there is a big shortage of headcount in the IT sector. So any way that can be addressed will be looked at by government and private sector.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't echo enough of what Nigel just said about the approach and how you engage with the Australian clients. When I was on the client side, I was really quite brutal. I used to manage multiple IT providers. I had 9. I had quite a large portfolio, and because you have so many, there was some experience where you just really knew where the relationship was so strong, those contracts lasted. And a lot of it has to do with that relationship, you know, and how you approach and your language and how you email, you know. You have to put in the filler words. You have to be courteous, polite, you know, bring some humor to the table. That's quite important.
Behave like your mother taught you to behave, right?
Yeah.
Be nice.
Well, some others, I don't know.
That's right. Yeah,
those good relationships will get you a long way in Australian culture and business. I think it is very business focused and professional, but you know there is an element of the, you know, the good bloke mentality. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, mateship, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and Pauline, one of the sectors I mentioned, you didn't mention, I think, was AI. I mean, is that what's cybersecurity technology, or let's say the sophistication in this part of the world? Central East Europe is very, very good, and the AI thing is sort of everywhere now. And again, today we have a few guys presenting some AI solutions. And in fact, at 10:30, in an hour and a half, we have guys from Prague on the AI side. Tell us a bit about that and what the trends are there in Australia.
Yeah, so I believe where we are ranked in regards to our AI capability, we're somewhere in the 26% out of 100. We're not doing that well in regards to the execution of it, but in regards to the appetite, the concept, the need, 100% we're there. So I think sometimes it takes a bit of a back burner for a lot of the industry areas because of the government reform, the regulatory reform. It's been quite significant for the last 5 years. There's been a Royal Commission review on industries consistently. So a lot of the diversion off AI to that has happened. So I think we're now in a sweet spot across industry. And so this is different to the technology startups. I'll talk about them in a sec. But the adoption of machine learning and opportunity to expand data and how data scientists can start working in the on models for companies to create outcomes to benefit, whether it's disrupting how they deal with regulatory reform or whether they deal or their productivity. That's really important and definitely going to play a larger role, I believe, and that's not going away. However, with COVID, the sovereignty, the cybersecurity is definitely, and the data privacy from where IT will invest and where companies are investing in, that may take a bit more of a dominant step. But when it comes down to special like technology companies, specifically the startup space and scale-up companies that are becoming large IT companies. AI is thriving and it's going really well. So for us, we probably, out of the 51 startups that we've got here, I'd probably say roughly about 60% of them have AI in the mix of their technology. And some of them are quite mature and leaders in their industry around one in particular company called CEE, as an example. They're actually over in Europe and India already, and the US with their technology. But there's a very industry specific AI focus. So the 7 sectors that I was talking about earlier, that are the main focus, all of those are littered with AI technology as a requirement. So it is industry specific focus. So you can actually go online and you'll be able to see the particular industries and where they're at and what they're focused and where the investment is going. So in the government, so the innovation groups that are in the government. So Advanced Queensland, as an example, has just invested in building a 3-year AI hub that will run, and it's been stood up. So that's located downstairs from where I am, and we work with them as well. And the focus is on investing in R&D, giving startups a space where they can come and test, as well as get access to experts and resources. Australia Computer Society, our actual president of the society is the New South Wales AI officer. So there is a lot of investment in this space and a lot of focus on data that you'll start to see coming out, but there is also a need for resources in that space.
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned is the cities or the states, and in the U.S. market, we have seen that some of the more progressive cities like Austin and Los Angeles have realized that they cannot supply all of the resources that a local company needs to develop. And so they've been keen on developing networks abroad that helps those local companies thrive, even though they're not hiring a new person directly in Austin, for example. Do you see that in Australia yet? Or some of the state of Victoria or New South Wales, Queensland, or do you see where they're saying, well, we can't do everything, so we'll try to lean on some networks and help you develop in Brisbane or in Melbourne with resources from outside Melbourne?
Yeah, I definitely think there's evidence of that in Queensland, and I can speak for Queensland. I can't speak for the other states because I just don't know. But I'm pretty sure there would be, given some of the news headlines I see from those state innovation updates. But Queensland particularly, our Chief Entrepreneurs Office, so we have a Chief Entrepreneurs Office, and you can look that up as well in the Queensland government. And that was run by Leanne Kemp, was our last Chief Entrepreneur, and she actually is a founder herself, located out of the UK, but she's an Australian, so she lives here. So she's back and forth, and she herself bought a lot of network from overseas and gave that access to a lot of the companies and government departments, as well as ourselves at River City Labs, access to those networks, which is why we've had so many visitors come out here. And then from there, we've exchanged and grown from there. I still keep in touch with a whole bunch of UK investors, as an example, because obviously investors are my interest to support the founders who are growing. So there is an appetite for that, and I don't think that one is a very big barrier. It's about just networking and connecting. I think probably that's your first stepping stone relating to how you can get in here and build a presence and a brand reputation. If people see you enough times, they're going to want to buy from you. And so you guys aren't present now, so you need to be more present. And so I'm happy to give any tips around that on, connecting you to the Queensland government side. I definitely think it's the experts and, global thinking is a great asset to bring here.
Okay.
Yeah, I would not underestimate what Pauline said. Of just showing up and being there is a big part of it. Yes, people will assume that you've got the skills and you've got the backup and you can do the job, but yeah, invest a little bit of time and effort and you'd be surprised at the results.
But we can't get there now. We can't fly there, Australia. You can't
No,
get in
digital.
Australia.
Everything's online.
You won't let us in.
Digital. No one's flying ever again, isn't it?
Last year, River City Labs, we ran 43 online events, and they were open to the public. So you guys are welcome to join any of them.
Okay, good, cool. Great. By the way, another kind of housekeeping, as this is the first session, as people from the audience have questions, Q&A, we're going to feed them through me, really, through the Hopin chat room. So I'll be looking for that as they come up. And so when you have questions for panelists, pop them onto the chat. We'll monitor that and make sure the questions get out. We have a little bit of trouble getting you on the screen with the Q&A right now, but we'll make sure that your question gets asked. Good. Well, guys, I think we're more or less on schedule. Tell us how warm it is in Australia, because we have a massive snowstorm here in Wrocław, Poland, with about, I think it's going to be minus 20 degrees soon. It must be hot sun and nice weather there, yes?
Sorry, yes.
We're at opposite ends of Australia. So Queensland, although it does tend to rain in summer, I think. Is that right, Pauline? But
It does. It does. But
Victorian summer is not as good as you'd think. It was nice today. It was about 30 degrees. But yeah, we had a pretty bad summer so far. Yeah. Polish summer, maybe.
One last thought or question. We also see in Central Europe, some of the companies that are setting up offices in the US as sort of back to what you're saying, be there, be visible, be on the ground. Have you all come across Central European companies or European companies that have set up there on the technology side, have set up offices there? And is there a space where, I mean, setting them office these days is cheap and inexpensive, shared office space, virtual space. Is that something that River City Labs has, or some experience with that?
Yeah, so we just got a French company has moved in today called Sunbird. So they quarantined, did all the good stuff, came in December and moved in today. So, and they're just growing. So I think there is lots of opportunity. When Uber first came to Australia, they sat in River City Labs. So there's definitely, we've been operating for quite some time, since 2012, and we've had over 700 companies come through. We've run multiple accelerators. So we not only help, obviously, startups here, but even the global startups that are coming from overseas. And if there is, obviously, I have one development team from India here, so they're not a startup, but they do provide services, and we opened our doors to them because even though they don't need the incubator stuff, it's resourcing and support for the founders, depending on the profile of the company and what they do and what they can offer. So there is definitely River City Labs, but every state has these types of co-working spaces or startup spaces or incubators like ours. So the difference, obviously, is incubators run programs. So we have accelerators that run here. We've got 3 planned for this year that are going to run. So it's more about getting the startup through some phases to milestones that are going to grow them rather than just being a co-working. But we also have co-working space, and we have some service providers who live in residence.
Great. All right. So
hey, one last thing I just want to let people know also that there is and Pauline would know, there's quite a strong grant culture and availability of funds for startups through either dollar for dollar matching programs or straight out grants. So if you may be concerned about clients' ability to fund some of this work, it's potential that the Australian government and state governments do provide, often, 50% of the development budget sometimes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. And they publicise who they provide grants to. So that's all on the government websites. You just got to hunt for it. It's not too hard. Just put in a few keywords. Is state government.
Okay. Great.
Follow the money.
Great.
Exactly.
Well, Pauline,
can I just mention one more thing, Tom?
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
Of course, yeah.
The global talent scheme that I was talking about earlier. So there has actually been a task force formed to help create some momentum around that by the federal government. And what that is truly to bring some of those expert skills in IT as well as entrepreneurship here, but not only that, move the companies here. So if there was a need for, you to have a satellite office in Australia where you would actually bring things over here, there's lots of incentives from the government to attract companies to move over here. And then, obviously you can have some level of a hybrid model, access your scaling resources over in your region. So I think there's so much opportunity and there is a real demand and some funding for it. So, maybe go and check out those on the federal government's website, which is the Global Talent Scheme.
Okay, that's great. Great.
Maybe some of those businesses who are east, Tom, might want to move all the way to Australia instead of just to.
There may indeed be, exactly. Nigel, Pauline, thanks very, very much. And last thought about meetings, just to remind the audience listening and you guys as well, make sure you look at your top right button on the hop in page. You'll have a little red, I think it's a red button that says you might have been invited to a meeting. Click on that, do a video meeting straight away. So some guys certainly will want to meet with you. Some of you have got private one-on-one meetings already arranged, but you might look for a random request as well. Keep your eyes open for that. It's kind of hard to see, but the top right screen, you'll see under your profile a little red button if they've asked you. Pauline, thank you very, very much. Really great presentation. Great insight. Nigel, thanks again for being on the panel. Appreciate the context very much and the time and the very last minute notice you jumped in. Thanks very much. We won't tell them how last minute it was, but it was last minute. So thanks a lot. We are off to Japan next, and you guys enjoy the evening, and see you next time.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.